Yesterday, Jared Kushner said the notion of the federal stockpile was it's supposed to be our stockpile. It's not supposed to be state stockpiles that they then use. What did he mean by our?
Oh, what are you asking?
And even the fact that taxpayers from
What's
every
that?
state
I
pays
got you.
for it. No,
You
it's
used the
not
word
a
our.
gotcha. What did
Our,
mean
you know
by
what our means? United States of America. That's what it means. It means
the states.
our. It means the United States of America. And then we take that our and we distribute it to the states.
So why did you
Not
say
that we
it's
have
not
to,
supposed to be state stockpiles that they then
because we need it for the government and we need it for the federal government. But when the states are in to also keep
giving it to if it's not to the states.
to keep for our country, because the federal government needs it too, not just the states. But out of that, we oftentimes choose, as an example, we have almost 10,000 ventilators, and we are ready to rock with those ventilators. We're going to bring them to various areas of the country that need them. But when he says our, he's talking about our country. He's talking, he's talking about the federal government. I mean, it's such a basic, simple question, and you try and make it sound so bad. You ought to be ashamed of yourself. You know what? You ought to be ashamed. It's such a simple question. He said our. And our means for the country. And our means for the states, because the states are a part of the country. Don't make it sound bad. Don't make it sound bad. Go ahead, Steve. Go ahead, back here. You just asked your question. You just asked your question in a very nasty tone. Let's go.
You didn't give me an answer.
Please.
Mr. President,
I gave you a perfect answer. You know it. Go ahead.
If you are more confused after listening to Trump's clarification of what Jared Kushner meant, then welcome to the club. This is Trump trying to clean up for Jared Kushner after a predictably botched press conference where his son-in-law announced a day earlier that the federal stockpile wasn't supposed to be used for the states, but rather for the federal government.
And you have instances where in cities they're running out, but the state still has a stockpile. And the notion of the federal stockpile was it's supposed to be our stockpile. It's not supposed to be state stockpiles that they then use. So we're encouraging the states to make sure that they're assessing the needs, they're getting the data from their local situations, and then trying to fill it with the supplies that we've given them.
Only, who does Jared Kushner think that the federal government represents? And that same bizarre sentiment was echoed by Trump, who insisted only on repeating this notion that the stockpile is needed for the, quote, federal government, or, quote, our country. Our country is the states. There is no federal government without the states. So unless Trump means that he's hoarding the national stockpile for the White House and its agencies, which, knowing Trump, I wouldn't put it past him, this whole idea that the stockpile isn't meant for precisely this situation to dole out to the states is quite the hill to die on. Now, for whoever hasn't figured this out yet, yes, our national stockpile is for use by the states, and it's been employed dozens of times in the last 2 decades since it was created in 1999. Even this administration has used the stockpile to send materials like beds and medical equipment in the aftermath of 3 consecutive hurricanes in the fall of 2017. The entire point of the stockpile is to help states fill the gaps when facing occurrences like natural or health disasters. So the idea that it wouldn't be employed now, in the midst of the worst pandemic to strike this country in a century, is just not rooted in anything resembling reality. But the reason that Kushner and Trump are having to qualify its use is because this administration has failed in overseeing the distribution of equipment and gear. According to the Daily Beast, quote, for weeks the administration struggled to understand which agency was responsible for studying the supply chain breakdown and which was in charge of fixing not only the dwindling medical supplies in hospitals, but also the shortages of products like toilet paper and paper towels in grocery stores. And it wasn't until as late as March 18th that FEMA actually took over, meaning that for the literal months since the US got its first case, there was no clear plan in place by the White House to actually deal with this crisis. And so not only are we seeing the Trump administration defend this fundamental misunderstanding about what the purpose of the national stockpile is, but then take extraordinary steps to will this false reality into existence. For example, if you look at the website for the national stockpile before Kushner's statement, it said, quote, strategic national stockpile is the nation's largest supply of life-saving pharmaceuticals and medical supplies for use in a public health emergency severe enough to cause local supplies to run out. When state, local, tribal, and territorial responders request federal assistance to support their response efforts, the stockpile ensures that the right medicines and supplies get to those who need them the most during an emergency. But after Kushner's statement, suddenly the same webpage read, quote, "The Strategic National Stockpile's role is to supplement state and local supplies during public health emergencies. Many states have products stockpiled as well. The supplies, medicines, and devices for life-saving care contained in the stockpile can be used as a short-term stopgap buffer when the immediate supply of adequate amounts of these materials may not be immediately available." Of course, I'm sure that was just a coincidence and was definitely not meant to lend credence to any gaslighting by Jared Kushner. But truly, no piece of gaslighting is worse than Trump's continued attempts to blame Obama for leaving him with, quote, "empty shelves in the national stockpile."
Previous administrations gave us very little ammunition for the military and very little shelf space. Let me just tell you, you know it, you know the answer. The previous administration, the shelves were empty. The shelves were empty. So what you should do is speak to the people from the previous administration, Jim, and ask them that question. Because the shelves were empty. And you know what else? The military shelves were also empty.
And the reason that's so egregious is because, according to a bombshell report just released by the Washington Post, the Obama administration actually greenlit a machine designed to churn out millions of protective respirator masks at high speed during a pandemic. But Trump's Department of Health and Human Services squashed it. So not only did Obama not leave the federal government with no plan or, quote, "empty shelves" as he's claimed, but it was Trump who actually ensured that they would be empty. The overall point here, though, is that this administration is so utterly incompetent that it's forced to spend the majority of its time correcting its own unforced errors. This isn't the reporter's fault if Jared Kushner makes the outrageous claim that the national stockpile isn't for use by the states. On the contrary, it's the literal job of reporters to clarify what that means. But that's the risk you run by filling an administration with loyalists instead of those who are actually qualified. And yet, once again, it's the American people who will suffer from yet more confusion and misinformation coming from the White House.